Hello, everyone. My name is Caitlin, and in this presentation, I will be discussing data and security breaches. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in. As an overview, I'll define what data and security breaches are, a brief history of major breaches, and I'll take a closer look at a company that did have a breach and how they handled it, what the outcomes were for the customers and the company itself, and why the breaches happened. Finally, we'll go over some risks and mitigations for breaches and take a closer look at how they might evolve into the future. A security breach occurs when an unauthorized party gains access to a system, network, or application by bypassing security measures. It's all about breaking into the infrastructure itself here. Some examples can include hackers exploiting a vulnerability in a firewall, unauthorized access to a company's internal network, or malware infiltrating a system. So really here, it's all about the compromise of security controls, regardless of whether data is stolen or not. For a data breach, this happens when sensitive, confidential, or protected information is accessed, disclosed, or stolen without authorization. Some examples here can be personal information like a social security number, credit card number and details, or even your name or address. This can also include intellectual property as well. The key point here is it specifically involves the exposure of data, which can occur because of either a security breach or due to human error, like sending a file over to someone that shouldn't have gotten it. So I'm primarily going to use data breach throughout the rest of the presentation, but I'm kind of referring to both of these at the same time. Okay, now that we have our definitions out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into some of the history of breaches. Let's start in the 2000s. So in 2002, California passed the first US data breach notification law, which really set a precedent for disclosure requirements going into the future. Then in 2003, we had the SQL Slammer worm, which was a buffer in Microsoft SQL Server that caused a global DDoS attack that disrupted ATMs and emergency services. And in 2005, this is the first year that breaches exceeded 1 million records. For example, the DSW warehouse had 1.4 million credit card numbers and names exposed, and Card System Solutions had 40 million credit card accounts exposed. So this really marked the start of the big boom of data breaches. In the 2010s, we have the Stuxnet worm, which was a sophisticated cyber weapon that targeted Iranian nuclear facilities and marking the rise of state-sponsored cyber attacks. Then we have the Yahoo breach in 2013 and 2014, where over 3 billion accounts were compromised, which is considered one of the largest breaches in history. We also have the Sony Pictures hack, where massive data theft and system destruction ended up being linked to North Korea. And then we have in 2017 the Equifax breach, where 147 million Americans' credit card data was exposed due to an unpatched vulnerability. Moving on to the 2020s, 2021 was a record-breaking year with 1,862 US breaches, which was a 68% increase from 2020. We also have Uber hacks and Metabank breaches. We have the MOVEit zero-day exploit, which was a supply chain attack affecting thousands of organizations globally. We have the mother of all breaches in 2024, where it exposed 26 billion records from multiple platforms, including Twitter, Adobe, and LinkedIn. We also have in 2024 the National Public Data Breach, where nearly 3 billion personal records were exposed from a background check data broker. It is worth noting here, though, that California did put into law in 2020 the California Consumer Privacy Act, giving residents more control over their personal information. So people have the right to know, the right to delete, the right to opt out, and the right to non-discrimination. So the key trends over the history of breaches is we see a shift from isolated hacks into massive aggregated leaks like the mother of all breaches. We see a rise of ransomware and supply chain attacks going into the 2020s. We see state-sponsored espionage and sabotage becoming more common as we head into the 2020s. And luckily, we do see some regulatory evolution as we head into the 2020s as well. Here's another view of some of the data breaches I mentioned in the slide before. The majority of these data breaches were due to either weak or outdated security controls, social engineering, underfunded security programs, or delayed detection and response times. I'll talk more in depth about Equifax in the coming slide, but I really want to go over Yahoo too. It's one of the biggest data breaches of all time, but I think we'll get more out of the Equifax breach case study. Equifax is another example of poor security maintenance. It's also considered one of the most significant cybersecurity data breaches in history. As a major credit reporting agency, Equifax holds sensitive information on over 800 million individuals and over 80 million businesses worldwide. To put a number to this breach exposed more than 40% of the US's population personal data. So when the US General Accounting Office did its investigation, they found that the data breach was caused by a combination of issues. First and foremost, the attackers gained access to Equifax's network by exploiting a vulnerability on their online dispute portal, and they then were able to send a code within the HTTP header executing on the Apache Struts server. Interestingly, the patch existed for the vulnerability, but for whatever reason, the security team did not apply it in time. So the hackers continued to gain access to the other servers until they accessed the databases containing sensitive information such as social security numbers, birth dates, addresses, driver's license numbers, and credit cards. Equifax did have network monitoring tools to potentially prevent all of this issues, but their TLS certificate was expired, which led to the encrypted traffic foregoing inspection. But once they renewed it, Equifax immediately noticed the suspicious activity. They discovered the breach, and less than a month later, they publicized the breach. However, the way Equifax handled the breach after they went public was poor. They cited the incorrect domain. The domain itself was set up to look more like a phishing domain rather than a legitimate web address, and victims had to waive their lawsuit rights to even check if they were affected by the breach or not. So this breach resulted in increased identity theft, reputational damage to Equifax, a $700 million settlement with the Federal Trade Commission, and the total incident cost Equifax about $1.38 billion. So this major breach caused stricter regulations to be enacted. It's also worth noting that 3 Equifax executives sold around $1.8 million of personal holdings of company shares days after the discovery, but more than a month before the breach went public. And the Department of Justice charged 4 members of the Chinese military for the attack. So it's believed that the data was not sold or traded on the dark web, just because they were able to connect some of the other breaches that had a similar pattern. So they figured out that it was most likely the Chinese military. I've listed a few threats here that both companies and individuals could be exposed to if they don't adequately maintain their security infrastructure, starting with legal liability and litigation. Inadequate security and control may result in serious legal liability. Businesses must protect not only their own information and assets, but also those of their customers, employees, and business partners. Failure to do so may open the firm to costly litigation for data exposure or theft. Personal or confidential data can be stolen or held for ransom. Nobody wants to go through that. Credential stuffing is where you may not realize a username or password has been stolen from one site and ends up being used in other accounts that you may have. This is really a reason why not to have the same passwords for a lot of your accounts. Espionage is another big one. Breaches can involve stealing intellectual property or trade secrets, either exploiting or reducing a company's competitive advantage or innovations. And then reputational damage. If there's a breach, companies can often have huge public backlash. They'll lose customers, lose some of their finances, and lose investor confidence, which all are extremely harmful. A lot of these mitigation techniques can be recognized from our textbook for best practices. They include access control, such as multi-factor authentication and role-based access that can help reduce access to all company data to just a select piece of company data. The principle of least privilege can be applied here as well. And then encryption is important because it protects sensitive data and is only accessed by those with the decryption key. Even if hackers intercept data, they can't read it. Regular testing, monitoring, and patching to security systems is also crucial. Timely patches can prevent breaches, and monitoring for vulnerabilities helps to ensure infrastructure safety. Rigorous testing can also help detect any potential issues or faults. Network securities such as firewalls, detection and prevention systems, as well as segmented networks, limit hacker movement in the case of a breach. So keeping an eye on third-party integrations is also important here to maintain those security practices. And then finally, we have making sure your employees are trained. It's a big part of risk mitigation because phishing training in particular is important, as well as the best practices for employees to learn. Unfortunately, social engineering is a target for many of these hackers, so employees must remain vigilant here. Some future areas of consideration for breaches include cloud computing, AI, supply chain, and quantum computing. For cloud computing, it will likely become an increasingly targeted area for hackers trying to expose any vulnerabilities within the infrastructure, especially through IoT devices. So any misconfigurations or weak points can create an entry point for hackers there. For AI and machine learning, it will increase the already rapidly advancing phishing attempts. They'll likely become even more realistic and harder to distinguish for employees. But on the other hand, with AI, company systems can become increasingly vigilant. Supply chain risks will also increase. So third-party vendors or providers are already becoming more targeted because attackers can target more than one company. But hopefully this is where blockchain technology can prevent some of those issues. And finally, with quantum computing, with the future contemplating commercial use of quantum computing, it's likely that these systems can break the traditional encryption methods. So companies will likely need to adopt post-quantum cryptography, such as lattice-based, hash-based, multivariate polynomial, or code-based cryptography, which essentially just means math-based problems that both the traditional and quantum computers will both have difficulty solving. So this will likely replace encryption protocols like TLS, VPNs, and digital signatures. So to wrap up, I have a few discussion questions to hopefully get some conversations going. First off, do you think laws around disclosing breaches should be more visible to the public? What should companies actually disclose, or is there any reason why they shouldn't disclose? Second, where do you see the future of either threats or mitigations surrounding breaches going? And then third, should companies be held liable for breaches caused by third-party vendors? Okay, and here are my links. Thank you for listening to my presentation and look forward to the discussion.